You are beautiful. You are strong. You are love. You deserve to have the life you desire. It doesn't matter what others say about you. It's about what you say about you. You are worthy. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. This is part 4 of the woke segment. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about the crack epidemic that occurred in the 80s. And so I'm actually just going to jump straight into it. And so 1980, cocaine is introduced to the United States. It was a drug that was highlighted in a lot of popular films at the time, and a drug that was used by a lot of middle income. And so 1982 came around, and during that time, there was an extremely high rate of unemployment, putting millions of Americans into poverty. At that time, minimum wage was only $3.25, which is barely enough, I feel, for at that time to support one person, let alone an entire family. Between 1982 and 1984, the amount of cocaine that got into the United States increased by a whopping 50%. 50%. And so it leads me to, as you can imagine, wonder, how is it that 62 tons of cocaine can get smuggled into the United States when you can't even get one Cuban cigar here at that time? Because the economy was struggling, and especially within inner cities, and minimum wage was so low, that amount of cocaine being imported into the United States opened up an underground economy for a lot of brown people. And so these jobs miraculously appeared where dealers were all on the streets selling crack, because between that time they found out a chemical way in which to transform cocaine, which, as you know, is a more expensive drug, to crack, which was less expensive and more affordable, especially in inner cities where unemployment poverty was at its worst. I know you're probably like, well, cops were out, so I know it couldn't open up that many jobs for people, but a lot of people were able to sell and deal crack without any issues because the police were actually paid off. And for those who weren't paid off, they actually shook down dealers and took the drugs for themselves to either sell it and also at times take their cash. And so they figured it was an even deal with leaving people on the streets without their stash and without money versus arresting them. Crack altered the way people thought entirely. And so Nancy Reagan started the Just Say No campaign around in the mid 80s. And so what that did was pretty much put a little tape over a much larger issue. And that it wasn't duct tape, y'all. I'm talking about some dollar store tape. Because it was just, I feel like, I don't want to say a publicity stunt, but it didn't fix the actual issues that brown people were facing in their inner cities and communities, where poverty was at an all-time high, unemployment was at an all-time high, and so people weren't able to afford food, provide for their families, and do the things necessary for them to live a decent human life. And so the Just Say No campaign, where people marched and got involved and the children got involved, and it just seemed like this big old great thing, did nothing truly for our communities. Absolutely nothing. I mean, if it was just that easy, what happened wouldn't have happened. And if it did, it would have, something else positive would have come from that, and it didn't. The communities today are still struggling and still considered projects. So what issue did that truly fix? And the worst part about it is that when that campaign started and parents got involved, they even started turning in their own children who had been abusing crack. You may know about a Caucasian nurse by the name of Shirley Brown. She worked at the Medical University of South Carolina at the time, and she had a lot to do with the rise of women being imprisoned for abusing crack at the time, because she was secretly drug testing her patients and then also asking them questions in which they answered honestly, because they asked her where the information would be going, and she assured them that they'd be staying, that their answers would be safe with her. And so she pretty much was working with the police the entire time. And when she did find those women abusing drugs, I forgot to even mention, she actually searched them to see if she could find areas to which they had been misusing. When those women were found with that in their system, or evidence that they had been abusing drugs, she would then contact the police and walk them to their bedside, and or even at times when they were delivering and still bleeding, right before or right after, I apologize, right after those women delivered, she would walk the police by their bedside, not even giving them 5 minutes after they just delivered their child, to get bearings with what had just happened and what was about to take place. In 1986, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act was about the most unjust law ever written by the federal government. And so it pretty much stated that someone who was found with 1 gram of crack would be able to be imprisoned for about the same amount of time as someone who had 100 grams of cocaine on them. Everyone knows that's not even close to being fair, but it's a law that was passed, and I believe that Reagan actually apologized for that one because it wasn't given much thought. I think they kind of acted off of pure need and want within the society, because politically some people wanted something to happen, something to be done with this drug epidemic occurring, and so did the people living within the United States. So they acted pretty irrationally and created a law that was pretty much stupid. So everyone knows that crack was more openly used in brown inner city neighborhoods more so than anywhere else. And so that bill cracked down really harshly on those who abused it. However, 2/3 of the population was actually known to have been white who abused crack. Between 1986 and 1994, not a single Caucasian person was arrested for the abuse of having crack on them within Los Angeles. So I have to backtrack a little bit. So back in between 1982 and 1984, when all the drugs were coming in and it had accumulated over 50% than what was here previously, the media actually started to cover it and was saying that they didn't know what was going on, how this was happening, and how this was able to occur, that the US was not using many resources to actually fight back. Drugs were coming in from the Bahamas, from Central America, and there was actually civil war going on in Nicaragua, in which for some reason Reagan found interest, and so he began to fund Nicaragua with food, pretty much paying for the war that was going on in a way. And during that time, there was a lot going on. But eventually, Congress said, that's enough, we're not supporting this war. And so Reagan had to figure out another way to go about continuing the process of what was going on. And so his administration got together and decided to go about things a little interestingly. And so at the time, they found out a way in which they were able to weapons to Iran and use the profits that they sold to them to fund what was going on, the Contra and Nicaragua. And so that's pretty much how the cocaine got to us, because the cocaine was imported from Nicaragua to the US. And so the Contras were able to, when they got their food and their supplies that they needed, their weapons and everything like that, bags suddenly appeared back on those flights back to the United States. And so that is how majority of the drugs got to the United States. And it benefited everyone except for Americans. Back then, people that were addicted to crack were treated like criminals. There are people who were arrested more than twice for having possession of crack, and all they did was lock them up. However, today in the United States, there is an opioid epidemic in which people are able to receive help. They're not being arrested. They're actually given help, therapy, whatever it is they need so that they can get off of this other addictive drug. What happened to the treatment for people back then in the 80s that were addicted to crack? Why is it that they couldn't get the help that they needed? Interesting enough, I feel like history kind of sets a tone for what is okay and what isn't okay, and kind of tells people without telling people what's going on. And so my question to you is, do you think that the crack epidemic was a mistake? I'm gonna leave that question with you all. I feel like watching this actually let you know my answer. And so I leave you with, you create your own destiny. Peace and love. Until next time, live well.